All right. Anyway, if you'd like to ask questions for any of our panelists, we'll have them pass microphone back and forth to answer any of your questions. If you don't ask questions, I'm going to be forced to. So get up here and ask questions. But I guess first, while people are thinking and contemplating, I'll give you guys a chance to respond to each other or to bring up any thoughts that come up in conversation or right off the bat immediately.
Thank you to Dr. Nolan for his paper. One of the things that I took right away out of it was the description of Walther's work, which I think is still a program for us today, and that is theological conferences at every level, parish education, which from my perspective includes Luther Classical College, and college education, and what was the third one? Help me out. I had them all. Oh, visitations. Yeah, visitation. So, and robust visitation to our congregations or any part of the church's life, I think is simply essential to the well-being. So that's a great program for the church today if it wants to recover.
And I would just add that it seems as though Walther took every opportunity that was given to him to teach and to reprove and to train. So this means, like, even if you hate your meetings, that's an opportunity for you to teach and reprove, whether it's elders, board of ed, or whatever the case is, always seeing that as an opportunity to carry out your office.
I want to thank the ACELC, the board, for setting up the conference, Holy Cross for hosting wonderful, wonderful papers. Appreciated all of them. I vow to kiss the girl. I have a question for Dr. Nolan about the policy statements for the district presidents.
Okay, go ahead.
I noticed you didn't have listed here one by Dr. Sums.
Which one was that?
The divine dismissal disposal document.
Yes.
Can you tell us if...
I'll tell you what happened to my copy. I did divine disposal, but now regret.
Can you, or potentially any district presidents, tell us of the stature of this within the Council of Presidents? Is it an official document?
Not to my knowledge. Do you know, Brian? Have you ever read the COP manual?
No. Are you aware of the document? Is it used as a playbook?
No, it's not used.
By any district president?
Well,
Sorry.
to my knowledge.
No official status.
No official status.
Thank you.
I have one comment to make, and I was, go ahead, Jenny, you can come up. And that is, I didn't address the issue of layman's role in the correction of doctrine. And now it's clear in Scripture the pastor has the duty. It is his duty when he's called, and if he doesn't do that and it's showing up in his congregation, certainly he's failing his job. So what is the job of the layman? Well, there is a book that Walther wrote toward the end of his life called The Sheep Judge Their Shepherd. And that will explain for laymen what their responsibility is. Now, I can tell you, my dad took this my dad was an adult convert. His background, the family on the Nolan side were all Baptists and Methodists and everything else. And he became an adult convert to the Lutheran Church by a great pastor in San Francisco. And when he was done studying the small catechism, he said to the pastor, "What's next?" And the pastor said, "Well, you can take communion now." He said, "Well, no, what's next for my reading and understanding what the Bible is?" And the pastor said, "Oh, nobody's ever asked me that before." He said, "Oh, it's the Book of Concord." So then in the early 60s, my dad read through the Book of Concord. And then when the members of the congregation found out he had done that, they elected him for everything, all the offices that were available, and it was really a great thing. And because he was filling his responsibility as a lay member of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and that is that first he instructed himself basically in the doctrines of the faith, and then he applied that through his service in the congregation. So that was omitted from my paper because of the lack of time. But layman, you have a role in this too, so please take that seriously.
By the way, sheep judge the shepherds. We have an LCA displayed Lutheran Concerns displayed downstairs, and I have copies of that. Anybody wants it, it's very good, very readable for laity. I mean, we have a huge responsibility. Okay, so Dr. Nolan gets up to get his paper, doctrinal correction, and he's got a 17-page. I thought this should be one-sided, of all the doctrines that have been corrected in the LCMS. I think it boils down to Stephan and predestination. Have any other doctrines or issues ever been corrected other than that?
So there's been tons of things. So you just look through our historic, for example, the comprehensive history of the Missouri Synod is by Epler, I believe, Century of Grace. I think the pastors here know about that. And so if you read through that, you'll see that doctrinal issues come up on a regular basis. In every generation, there's something Missouri Synod had to deal with. And they try to answer the questions, whether it's a practice or a teaching, because both are doctrinal things, on the basis of Scripture and confessions. I mentioned Stephan because that's the very beginning of the Missouri Synod, and I mentioned the predestination controversy because it's the biggest conflict. And in fact, the conflict over doctrine destroyed something that Walter had hoped that he would be able to get all of the Lutheran synods in the Midwest together under one organization. And that was what the goal was. And because of the predestination controversy and Walter's insistence that we have to follow the Book of Concord, that it broke up. We lost the Ohio Synod. The Norwegian Synod split in parts. So that's the only reason I put those in there, but there's tons of things. So you just have to read our history.
Okay, well, I guess I think of the big things like Yankee Stadium, the Statement of the 44.
Those are more recent, of course. Yeah.
Okay, my other question is, how can the visitors and the district presidents are supposed to go out and visit? How can they do that when they're pastors and they're kind of busy on Sunday morning themselves?
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's good. I can speak for our district, which has been doing visitations for, 30, 35 years or so. It's been a long, long time. Our circuit visitors, and we are also assisted by our vice presidents, and I, of course, do some of those official visitations. It's a weekend activity, Saturday and Sunday. We visit with the pastor. We visit with the pastor and his wife at dinner together. We, as the need arises, might visit with a group of leaders, the elders, the church council, or something, if that's desired. Go to church on Sunday morning, Bible class, and make ourselves available to individual members as needed. What our pastors do is get a supply preacher in to preach for their congregation while they're doing the visitation, or sometimes they just have to give a sermon to the elders to read, and they just don't have communion that Sunday. Okay. So some sacrifices have to be made if you're going to do this.
Okay, the other question or comment, Dr. Saunders, I understand, you said you're now the chairman of the CTCR. Well, how is that going to help us? I mean, are you getting new members, or what exactly is your role as opposed to Liebenau, whatever his name is? I thought he was
Joel Aidenbauer is the executive director of the CTCR, and Rick Serena is the associate executive director. So those are the two full-time employed.
Is that more administrative?
Yeah.
Okay. And you are theology. What are you doing?
I'm the council president's representative to the CTCR. So the council presidents elected me to serve on the CTCR. So I'm not elected by convention and Senate, or Senate and convention. Otherwise, it's populated by some professors from each seminary who are appointed by the president of each seminary. Then the rest of them are elected by Senate and convention. And then Larry Rast has been the chairman for, I think, about 18 years. And he stepped down as the president of Fort Wayne Seminary, which means he now is off the CTCR because he was only on CTCR because of that position. So when he stepped down off of that, then the CTCR meets and votes from the voting body, their chairman, vice chairman, and committee chairs and that sort of thing. There's 3 committees, and I got voted as chairman, so I oversee all 3 committees. The committee 1 deals mainly with church relations. That's the one I sit on. And my responsibility is to read all doctrinal statements and bylaws and constitutions of church bodies who want to come into fellowship with us. Committee 2, I think, deals with issues of biology, the statements that we put out concerning transgender and that sort of thing. And then Committee 3 deals with specific doctrinal issues. And so I then head up the executive committee, which sets the agenda for the meeting. And so I do have a voice on the issues that will be addressed in the upcoming meetings that we meet 4 times a year.
Well, looking forward to great things.
I will say that the makeup of the CTCR is pretty homogeneous, pretty strong.
Again, thank you all for your presentations and your papers. They've really been encouraging and very, very helpful. What I would like to hear, if you wouldn't mind going through kind of each one of you, if you could identify one kind of specific error that we're facing. And by that, I mean, we can say, well, unionism is a problem. Okay, well, how is it a problem right now? Like right now? Not 10 years ago, not Yankee Stadium necessarily, but like, what are we facing right now? And then, especially for those who have leadership positions within the Synod, what is 1 or 2 things that we can do to help get that addressed? Is it, do you just need letters of support from 50 congregations saying this is a problem in our district? Do you need us to do something? What would that be? So if you could each maybe think of like the one thing that we're facing right now, and then maybe 1 or 2 things that we can do to help you or to help ourselves alleviate that problem. I know it's a big question, but it'd be good. Thank you. I'll take it since.
I guess since I have the microphone, I'll start. One of the issues that I'm addressing as a district president is the divine service. And not that we have trouble with our divine service in our district, but the participation of when we say the handing over by the ordained office to those who are not ordained to do the things that the ordained office has a responsibility to do. And so one of those is the lectern. And in the issue of the lectern, women reading from the lectern. Personally, I think that is a violation of Scripture. And I think it's also a very poor understanding of the office of holy ministry. And this will include the CTCR, which I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The 1985 document was not helpful on women in the church. And it was used by the 1989 convention, Synod and convention, to declare that lectern reading is adiaphora. And I think that's fundamentally an error. And I do want the CTCR to address that. The altar, the pulpit, and the lectern are all interconnected. And just to simplify things, what direction is the reader facing? Well, he's facing the congregation. When the chancel is facing the congregation, you have a sacramental act. not a sacrificial one, a sacramental act. We've never handed the sacraments over to the laity in divine service. So just that alone is something that should be helpful. That's not a massive problem in my district, but there are, and the more that it continues, the more it teaches the young girls sitting in the pew that this is something they want to aspire to. It's an ongoing problem, in my view. And I think that our church body needs to look at this exegetically, historically, confessionally. Luther never had non-ordained readers. Walther never had non-ordained readers. And so this is one particular issue that I think our church body has been limping along with for quite a long time, and it's just unhealthy for us.
Just to that as well, before I get into my answer, which you can probably expect, by having lay people in the chancel, it denigrates the vocation of the hearer of the word, and preachers exist for the purpose of the hearers of the word. Preachers are not an end unto themselves. So God puts a man into the pulpit and into the chancel so that his people can receive his gifts. That's the work of Sunday morning. And to say, if you really want to participate in Sunday morning, well, we've got to get you involved in the service. We've got to get you doing some readings or lighting the candles or something like that. It denigrates God's end goal of having his people hear his word and receive his gifts. And we really need to raise up that calling and remind our people that is the most important thing that can be done on Sunday morning. And really, God's ministers are just a means toward that end. So the one problem, and my paper, is sort of aiming at how do we engage a culture that itself isn't nice toward us, but there's this sort of prevailing sentiment that Christians are called to be nice. And I think that's how we got wrapped up, how our thinking got infected with egalitarianism. That it's not nice. It's already not nice that we don't have women pastors, for instance. So what can we do to encourage the women in the pews and encourage our young girls at home so that they don't feel left out? They're already in this backward-thinking, knuckle-dragging church body that refuses to get with the times and ordain women. So at least because that's off limits, then we've got to open up everything else and make everything else, if it's not a function of the pastoral ministry, we've got to make it accessible to our women as well. So whether it's dealing with an egalitarian, feminized culture, or engaging conversations about transgenderism or homosexuality or any of these things where the ground rules for the church seem to be, from those looking outside in, that we've got to be nice, that's been our downfall. And instead of worrying about what's nice, we ought to extol those transcendentals of truth and goodness and beauty that we find in God's word, and particularly in his creative work. What he declares very good is very good, and because his Spirit works through his word, will eventually be winsome to people.
Very good. So I would have more than one, but I'll just stick with one. I think our church body right now is struggling with the question of the place of the law in the Christian life. And So the discussion about male and female falls into that category. How we do our preaching and teaching, the passing on of virtue, the role of the example of the pastor, the father and mother in a household, so forth, all kind of bound up with that. Even questions of natural law are all, I think those are very strong, serious issues, obviously for our culture also, but I think we've been much more infected by the world's kind of view of that and by some errors in doctrine than we have recognized. And so the recent conference on the third use of the law, I think, was an attempt or the beginning of an attempt to address some of those issues. And I've just kind of even observed it in the transition. So again, I kind of like to look at catechisms as they develop, to look at hymnals as they developed. You know, a lot of our hymns have cut out, some of the hymns that are the recent hymnals cut out verses or stanzas or hymns that address some of these issues in a very direct and beautiful way, helping us in terms of persecution or speaking very directly to the virtue of the Christian, and those are just all challenges that I think we need to give a whole lot more thought to. It became very clear to me as a headmaster of a school, when I'm asking the question, how do we pass on virtue to our children? How do we teach them the law? Why are we failing at it? And at some point I began to see that even my own preaching and teaching has been infected by that. And I think there are a lot of us now that are returning to a deeper examination of those issues.
So I guess my perspective right now, after being 7 years in the West Coast, San Francisco Bay Area, California, Nevada, Hawaii district, which is my original district, I'm going to have a different perspective than, let's say, the officers of the Synod and the districts in the Midwest. And what I see out there that really bothers me is products of the lay worker movement, certified lay workers, the EEIT, and they don't know their doctrine, and they're not committed to the Book of Concord. That bothers me. Now, because first off, the seminaries need to be doing that, and if the seminaries aren't doing it, there's problems there. But it's like a regular pattern, because the Western districts have, because their churches are small and so spread out, and there's many ethnic groups coming in, they've relied on inadequately prepared pastors. Let's put it that way. If you're not going to do anything else, if you don't have time for Greek or Hebrew and all the other great stuff that we learn, you got to learn your doctrine. Otherwise, you're not going to be Lutheran. So to me, in my perspective on the West Coast and looking at Intermountain West, it needs to be, we need to get back to the understanding of doctrine for all the pastors, whether they have seminary training or not, and that they're committed, fully committed to scriptures and confessions.
Yeah, President Hill sort of stole mine.
That's number two.
But I sort of see it kind of the way you described it, Marty, in terms of a constellation. You know, in the 16th century, we were battling an attack against the second article of the Creed. Shortly thereafter, the third. I think the place where the world and the devil and our flesh is attacking is the first article of the Creed. And that entails the use of the law, the orders of creation, that all of these things are under attack. And do we see the creation as a good gift of God or something to be avoided? How do we make use of that? And the forgiveness of sins doesn't tell us how to do that. It tells us what our proper relationship should be, but it doesn't say, do this. or do that. It just says your sins are forgiven. Right? It restores a relationship to it, but it doesn't actually give direction. And so I think a refocusing on that first article of the creed and building that out in terms of how does God desire us to live in this world, and how does he want us to flourish in it? And what direction does he give us? How does he order our lives according to his word? And that goes along with other presentations that we've had. So I just would say, let's take a look at the first article.
And this is for anybody who wants to weigh in. As you know, the ACELC has addressed or identified 10 areas. The board's approach for this conference was sort of a triage approach. What seems to be the most pressing? What are the issues we need to address first and foremost? And so that's why we picked those 3. And so I'd just be curious if you think that's an accurate assessment. And then also, is there anything we're missing? And that could be, just in terms of what are the theological implications or things we need to be more aware of? Or is there anything you would like to say that maybe kind of in some sense pushes back against the ACELC? Like, is there something somewhere where we might need to be corrected? I'd be curious about your thoughts.
I don't know if this is a correction, but I think for all of us, we're very good at being able to point out what's wrong. But we struggle at building a vision of what is right. And again, that goes to your point about the use of the law. We have to be able to say, or at least describe, what the thing looks like if it's properly ordered, or if it's the way it ought to be. We have to do that kind of work and not just say, well, this is off, right? You get this in the Book of Concord. We deny this and we affirm this. And this is a basic rule of logic that you have to affirm and deny. And I think we do a lot of denying, but we're not always describing or giving our people what this looks like according to what God has put forward to us in his word.
Yeah, I would just encourage continued engagement with Synod from congregation and circuit all the way up through district and Synod. I was going to add, I'll just tell you what my second issue is since you've given it to me. And I'm sorry I haven't read through the 10 things that you've got, so I don't know if this is on your list. But I'm convinced that we have a deep issue that runs across all the theological perspectives on scriptures, that there has been a very sort of postmodern hermeneutic of scriptures that has infected our whole approach and thought process and understanding. It's very deep seated. It's hard to get to in terms of where it is and what the problem is. But in many ways, you look at it too closely and it begins to look like Simonex again. And it shows up maybe most obviously in the area of the clarity of scriptures, where, we're all affirming together. I think you could ask almost anybody across Synod, do you believe in the inerrancy of scripture? They're going to say yes. But then you're going to examine, well, when the Apostle Paul tells, Timothy to give attention to the public reading of scriptures, does the public reading of scriptures belong to the office of the holy ministry? And they're going to say, well, that's not very clear. Or what they've done to 1 Corinthians 14 on let the women be silent. That they're going to rewrite and reinterpret when the text is actually just crystal clear, and that's a lot of that's due to sort of a whole variety of postmodern approaches to scriptures. And I think that's a danger again that's cutting through a lot of our debates.
You've asked the question, what can ACELC do? You guys started after I became a district president. That's how long I've been on the Council of Presidents. And there were some
pretty strong criticisms about ACLC from some members of the Council of Presidents. I really didn't know who you guys were. And when I heard what was said, I take the perspective that I always do when somebody talks about somebody else. Did you go talk to them? Did you clarify what you're saying? Have you given them an opportunity to respond to what your concerns are? Of course, the answer was no. And so I decided to go to one of your conferences, and it was in Nebraska, and I was actually ended up being asked to speak at it. It was on admission to the Lord's Supper. I found none of the accusations to be accurate, none whatsoever. And so when I returned from that meeting and in the subsequent Council of Presidents meeting, I called the guys out, which really made me popular on the COP. But most of those fellows are gone. And it's a very, very different Council of Presidents now. But I defended you. I found nothing untoward at all. Your writings I found to be well-researched, well-documented, well-written, very understandable, pretty much on a laity level as well as a clergy level. I thought that was a great publication, what you do. And the conferences that I have attended, I found nothing at all that would deserve any of the accusations that came. And so when they did, and it was a different administration at that time, I confronted them and just said, it's enough of that. And I'm going to call you out every time you make a statement about them, because it tells me that you've not been to one of their conferences and you've not spoken to them. And that's not the way the church carries itself out. And so when you ask, what can we do more, from my perspective, just continue to be faithful. Fidelity is always blessed by God. In whatever measure and way he decides to do it, remain faithful to what you vowed to uphold. When I did my PhD work in Europe, the big thing was leadership. Well, that found its way to the United States, too. And I just wouldn't participate in those discussions in class, and the professors wanted to know why I wouldn't. And I said, well, if I have to read a book to learn how to be a leader, I'm not much of a leader. And so they said, well, what would you say a leader is? And I said, well, I guess a leader is somebody who trusts what he believes and vowed to be true, that he has the courage to actually practice it, whether anybody follows him or not. And that's all I ask of you. You've already taken your vows. You've already confessed before God and the church what you believe to be true. And I think, as I've seen, you have the courage to practice it. Whether anybody follows you or not, that's what a leader is. And that's what I would encourage you to continue to do.
I'd first say just continue what you're doing. I see this as an ongoing process. Since the original State of the Church Conference back in the late 50s, early 60s, the faithful pastors, faithful laymen of the Missouri Synod have been meeting in conferences like this. And it has spawned publications and other organizations. These days, we're losing. I mean, in terms of the numbers, maybe it's maybe because the organizations have done their job well, and the general, overall, the leadership of the Missouri Synod, its seminaries, are where they should be. And when that happens, then people maybe get a little bit lazy. So some of the organizations that I have been involved with over the years, they're gone. Partly because the leaders have passed on to glory, others because of disinterest. But I would say this, we need to keep at least one national organization going. We can't let, we can't let our guard down. We're not talking about Professor Garden for Wayne. We need to keep at this. And because if you don't have this, then the other side wins. So I'll give an example. When I first moved to California 7 years ago and learned about what's going on, I've told some of you about this. In politics, the Democrats rule everywhere. State House, governor, administration, all the judges, all the major cities, it's all Democrats. And I said, the reason that you're having problems in this state, all the things you're complaining about, is because there's nobody to hold them accountable. As it used to be when I was growing up, it was equal fighting back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. People got tired of it, and so they just voted Democrats in. Well, then nobody's keeping the Democrats honest. And there used to be honest Democrats. I can't say there are any in California. I'm sorry. There really aren't. And we might send some out to the governorate level. But my point being, and this is something that the founders of the United States understood, in the creation where there's called the balance of powers. So you have the executive, the judicial, the legislative. They keep each other honest, and the different parties keep each other honest. We need to have in the Missouri Synod, because we're so anti or countercultural, we need to have an organization or several organizations that cooperate, just like this, to keep these guys honest. And me too, as a parish pastor. Because if I'm out there all by myself, I'm going to get discouraged, and I may give up. Or I may start doing bad things. It's groups like this that help keep us going as a Missouri Synod to what we've always been, that we've always said that we're about. So thank God for all of you and your especially the leaders that do so much work on this. I'd say just keep doing what you're doing. And if you're a little bit different than another group, that's fine with me. But somebody's got to be out there who's not part of the governmental system of the Missouri Synod to keep us all honest.
Paul Becker, I'm a parish pastor in Kingsport, Tennessee. First, thank you comment to Dr. Noland for his only favorable reference I've ever heard of Martin Stephan. Seriously.
I like the first name.
But without him, we wouldn't have gotten on the boats to come over to the New World. So, and without his transgression, we wouldn't have had CFW Walter. So there you go. So my question for the panel is about more our context in America. And I've got 3 examples, and then the 4th one is my question. So in the past, we've referenced women's suffrage, government schools, and one other thing that just slipped my mind. But the last thing that, we mentioned internet communion. So I'm wondering if there's any other things that we have learned or think that we could be learning better from the whole experience of COVID, so that we do better next time. I really think that's an important question. I haven't heard it discussed enough to satisfy me, and I'm partly responsible. I think we need to discuss that. So what's your response?
I think we learned that there are overlapping concerns between the state and the church, and we need to be vigilant at guarding against where the state steps too far and say no. I think that is something that we learned. I think we knew that the culture and the state wasn't necessarily pro-Christian, but I think we definitely, at least in my state, I'm from Illinois, we definitely began to see that it was very anti-Christian, right? So just recognizing that we're not living in the place that my parents grew up or their parents grew up, this is just the reality of boots on the ground. And to reclaim what our forefathers put down, like Amsdorff, Lutheran Melanchthon later in his discussion about the extent of the state and what it can do and what the church's response should be, or individual lesser magistrates and things like that. That's one huge thing, like where those overlapping concerns happen and how far is too far.
just to echo that, we learned the government is not our friend, and we really had, an Acts 5:29 moment, and we didn't fare so well, and because just our human nature, the fragility of our flesh inclines us to an unhealthy fear all the time. So it's easy to stoke that fear up in people, and then to use it against them, or to use it against the institutions, the family and the church. What we've learned then is that, next time those are our priorities, and our creed in a time of national crisis always needs to be, we must obey God rather than men.
Very related to the last round of questions and comments. Each of the issues the ACELC has identified, as well as the last question, as it goes through time, these things seem to sneak up on us. But then we're always reacting to them there too. You notice the common thread, the constellation, kind of this underlying issue of the law. I think personally, there's somewhat of this Platonizing, Gnosticizing of the law, separation of form and material, if that's possible, which it isn't. And that's always there underlying, especially in America. What are some things that you might see that could manifest rather imminently? With the internet non-communion is something that surprised us just recently, and all the other issues with COVID. What might be something that we might be seeing coming up? A manifestation of this imminently.
Here, I'm going to pull on my hat as American church historian, American church. I don't think that we have, as a synod, or our theologians adequately, we've tried an analysis of the dominant religions, plural, around us. Because if they're the dominant religion, they're affecting our children, definitely. And people coming into our churches have these backgrounds. So what are those dominant religions? The dominant religion in the United States today is still the American social gospel, and it's embraced by all of the mainline denominations. And what we've been talking about here is that in recent years, it has morphed into original social gospel was about the unions, labor unions. It adopted eventually the rights of women, and more recently, the rights of gay, lesbians, etc. Well, what I'm telling you is that the mainline, people have said, well, these political things that are going on look awfully religious. Well, I'm telling you, they are religious. They are the center of the religion of the mainline denominations. How do I know that? I went to Union Seminary in New York City, not to study that, but that's what I found out. We're not dealing, except for some laymen in those churches, with Christianity anymore. We're dealing with something else. It's American social gospel. And look that up on the Wikipedia or whatever. But we have to understand that, because that's our religious environment. Just like Paul had to understand the pagan religion and the Jewish religion of his day. And the other groups, we're actually fairly close in many ways to the conservative Presbyterians. In some ways, we're close to the conservative Catholics. American social gospel, we have nothing in common with them. But our people are influenced by them. Our politics are influenced by them. And as we grow as a denomination and as a force a unique force now within the United States. This is something we have to really understand and deal with in our own catechesis of our people. So that's my answer to that question. Maybe I went not directly where you intended, but that's what I see what we need to do. Not our group, I mean our Missouri Synod and our allies. We need to address this and understand it.
To piggyback on that, I think that the majority of people in our pews, and probably even those who are in the pulpits, still think that there's something that is indifferent. Like that there is a secular thing that is not religious. That there is a public sphere where you can evacuate all religious confessions, testimonies, and thinking. And that has to be eradicated. There is no third way. There's no neutral territory. It's either pagan or it's Christian. And the fact that we have been able to kind of breathe that poisoned air of allowing for a neutral territory is, again, telling, and goes back to the fear God, not men. So, yeah, I just would say we have to be vigilant in pointing out there is no neutral territory.
One thing that I might say is on the horizon, and this comes from being a former baseball player and college baseball coach. In the summertime, it's AAU baseball. In the winter, it's AAU basketball. In the spring, it's AAU soccer. And we're creating a generation, or generations being fed with apathy. And the dangerous thing is now they're becoming apathetic about apathy. That just means they don't care. And they're not going to care. And that's become a religion. I'm not anti-sport, obviously, but it has become a religion. I think that we need to wake up to the fact that now these kids are going to grow up to be apathetic about apathy.
Can we just settle for like online baseball?
Pastor Brock from Emmanuel in Wichita. Pastor Nolan, on page 5 of your paper, you say that Chemnitz reminding pastors that they have the duty and obligation to refute false doctrine and warn the congregations of peril about salvation from that false doctrine. And of course, they had no internet, they had no telephone, they had no car to get in. Chemnitz debated some Roman Catholic, I know at times, face to face. So isn't it fair to say that he would read what they had written or heard the debate and then refute it from that? And that was the standard, and now we have all these other forms. Are we just to X them out totally, or how do we use all of that?
Idea then?
Yes.
Yeah. So what he has explained, that if you're not aware of it, is that Chemnitz was an outstanding polemicist. He dealt primarily in the things that we know of as a bishop, or I don't know exactly what his title was. He was superintendent, general superintendent. So, yeah, a visitor. So he had the responsibility that these two gentlemen have in Braunschweig-Wolfenbüttel, I believe that was and we have the church order now in English, so you can read that book to find out what he did as his normal job. But he also had the responsibility, because of his theological gifts, of dealing with controversial issues within the Lutheran Church itself. And that's what the Formula Concord was all about. And then he also dealt with other issues which are in other publications, So yeah, he did a lot of things. We're not all gifted for those type of tasks. Chemnitz was an outstanding, probably the most gifted man of his generation among the Lutherans. I put Gerhard up there too. If you look at all these things these guys wrote. So the question, I guess, comes to the average pastor is, first off, what do I put in the pulpit? My general rule of thumb is I'm preaching on the text of the day, and as I prepare my sermon, I'm asking myself the question, those four uses. So is there something here that I can teach doctrine or something that I can refute doctrine? Is there something about morality, the life of the Christian, or encouraging and admonition people toward the life? I think that fourfold use, pastors, you have to read that article. It's very good because it's what our Lutheran pastors used to do. I won't go for the history of how things have changed, but it's very useful. And so when I prepare my sermons, I'm always looking at, does this text address a false doctrine that is present in our church or our community or that they may be aware of? And so often in my sermons, I'll have something, well, the Baptists teach such and such, and they're wrong. And this Bible passage we're looking at is one of those passages that proves they're wrong. And that doesn't always make me a lot of friends, especially if they have relatives in town visiting. And then sometimes the Baptists will come and say, thank you for saying that. I never knew that. So it comes in my work anyway, as a parish pastor, as I'm dealing with the text of the sermon, and then also in Bible class. In Bible class, I do this all the time. And my wife said, a couple years ago, she said, you put a lot of doctrine in your sermons. I said, that's intentional. I said, that's what my professors taught me to do. And maybe I do that more than others, but I said, that's part of my job. It's listed as, I'm not just preaching the law to make you feel bad and the gospel to make you feel good. I'm also trying to take this text and teach you doctrine, correct false doctrine, and correct improper understandings of morality. So that's how I do it anyway. That's the primary job of the pastor, because you're called to preach and you're called to teach. Now, when it comes to the internet, it's like you're dealing with the outer space. It goes on and on. It's infinite. So you really can't address that, except what I do is when a member comes to me and says, well, I've seen this, and what does it mean, and how do I respond? So it's on the basis of that particular need that I'll first explain it to them, and then it triggers in my mind, or maybe my people have seen this, so then I address it in a sermon or but I just don't go out into the internet trolling for this type of stuff, because it just takes too much time. Everything is out there. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's how I answer Pastor Brockman. Do you know?
Pastor Tyson, Trinity Lutheran Church, Northern Missouri. This is meant as in the spirit of the conference, and maybe will function as a segue here, but with regard to fraternal conversation, this comes out of the breakout group we had. The question was asked, how do we go about working towards remedying these issues that we see in Synod, specifically as it pertains to the responsibilities that ecclesiastical supervisors have over pastors in their parishes? And an anecdote that was shared was that there have been pastors who've had very profitable discussions with their bishops. And as those fraternal conversations, really those friendships have developed, there's been a clearer understanding of correct doctrine or practice. And then that's in turn benefited the district, even if it has brought that particular bishop in conflict with some of his peers, or those who at least used to share perhaps false perspectives on things. In the spirit of that, do you think it's practical, and how might you go about doing it, beginning to establish a kind of relationship like that with your district president, when oftentimes, especially if you might view it as being adversarial, how do you remedy that and then have profitable fraternal conversation with them in a way where this is brotherly, truly? understanding that we're all part of this ministerium here and God has given us this responsibility to fear him first, right? And then preach and teach rightly for the benefit of our hearers and for the benefit of the church.
And you have 2 minutes to answer.
Well, I would just simply encourage that, definitely. So I would say, always be honest. Don't be deceitful. Okay. Always be honest, but by all means, develop that relationship, communicate, go travel to his office and sit down and visit with him, just as you should do with anybody with whom you're dealing. So yeah, by all means.
Previously, I think that there were that kind of relationship by district presidents. I think I can say confidently that that's no longer there. Time takes care of things, and people get older and retire. And the current council of presidents, I can't think of anyone who's not approachable. If they'll receive me, they'll receive you. And so I can say that I get multiple phone calls now from district presidents asking for advice by districts which would not even acknowledge I existed previously. So, make an appointment, go visit him, sit with him, and talk with him. Some districts are pretty big, and it's hard to get that time. But somehow, some way, some connection needs to be made where they can be sitting down face to face. And I sound like I'm overemphasizing that. I'm not. I can't overemphasize face to face. Kimmett's dealt with an established, grounded, and founded church body when he wrote The Two Natures of Christ in the Lord's Supper. He wasn't dealing with what hearsay. He was dealing with what was actually in canon law. Whether he sat and talked to those bishops, I don't know. But establish, how do you want them to establish a relationship with you? Do that with them.
Can we show our appreciation, please?